Hello there, I'm Tommy. Welcome to Blitz Transmissions. In today's video, this is one of those where I wanted to just sit down and share my thoughts on a topic that's being pretty hotly debated in the Star Wars The Black Series collecting community as of late. Most recently, I saw this topic get brought up on the Lazy Sunday livestream series run by my good friends at Out of the Basement, Nate and Justin. They had another good friend of mine, the Zoo Boy from Monday Night Figure Ball, on their show, and they were discussing a hotly debated topic in the community right now. This topic is the kind of balance or imbalance, depending on how you look at it, of clone troopers versus cantina aliens. The Black Series finds itself in a very interesting bubble of collectors. The Black Series tends to have a very largely younger audience, whereas the 3 3/4 stuff like the Vintage Collection and the Retro Collection tend to have an older audience. That's not to say that every person that collects the Black Series is, 30 and below, or that every person that collects mainly 3 3/4 inch stuff is, 30 and above. It's all just to say general trends show that the Black Series community has a younger audience, whereas the 3 3/4 stuff tends to have an older audience. With that younger audience, we tend to find ourselves in a little bit of a generational gap. This gap should not come as any surprise to collectors, as it is something that's very consistent in any collecting hobby. Interestingly enough, looking at different YouTube channels and different blog posts and forums and Reddits and things like that, it really seems like the strongest draw for the Black Series right now is more characters from the prequel era and the Clone Wars. I think that Hasbro has started to catch on to this, and in catching on to that, we've seen a lot more releases of things like clone troopers, things like characters from the prequel trilogy of movies like Sebulba, Luminara Unduli, and Shaak Ti, and a million more well on the way. With that though, we've seen a little bit of an outcry for the recent lack of original trilogy characters in the Black Series line. The biggest point of this argument is that Moman Nadon, a deluxe figure that came out this year from A New Hope, he's a Cantina alien, was the only original trilogy figure to come out this year for new mainline releases. And with that, I've seen friends on channels like Monday Night Figure Ball and Out of the Basement and other channels saying that they want to see more Cantina aliens. However, with that sentiment, I've also seen a lot of people saying that they want to see clone troopers pulled back. They want to see less of a volume of clone troopers coming into the Black Series line. Clone troopers, I feel like, are the main one that people point out as they have too many of, because there are hundreds and hundreds of different variants of clone trooper, whether it's the different classes of, Phase 1, Phase 2, ARF troopers, ARC troopers, clone commandos. I could go on and on and on. And then you have your different units of clone troopers, whether it be different legions like the 501st or the 212th, or different specialized units like Delta Squad. And then you have named clone troopers, whether it be commanders or grunts. There is a big outcry specifically for these clone troopers. Now, interestingly enough, and Justin from Out of the Basement brought this up, it's something that I've actually been thinking about for a while now, is that there's this weird generational gap between kids who grew up with the prequel trilogy of movies and kids who grew up with the Clone Wars series. And I want to make that point in this video that there is definitely a distinct difference between these two groups of people, even though they are so close in age. For people that are right now approaching their 30s, in their mid to late 20s, they were old enough to grow up and see some of, if not all of, the prequel trilogy movies in movie theaters. They remember them more vividly, they remember the toy lines more fondly, and so they want those theatrical figures more as opposed to obscure clone troopers from the Clone Wars series. And then there are people like me who are in their early to mid 20s or younger. We were not old enough to see any of the prequel movies in theaters, and a lot of times we saw them on DVD after they came out. What we were old enough for, however, was to see the Clone Wars movie in theaters. That was actually the first Star Wars movie that I ever got to see in a movie theater, and it's a memory that's ingrained into my head forever. There is so much that I remember when it comes to the Clone Wars, and that's why for myself, I consider the Clone Wars as my Star Wars I grew up with, even more so than the prequel trilogy of movies. Even though those were the newest trilogy when I was growing up, and they were still very prominent, I had a lot of the toys, I have much more of a deep connection to the Clone Wars series. And as the name implies, the Clone Wars had a lot of clones. For myself, and a lot of people I know I can speak for that grew up with the Clone Wars series, the clones are an integral part of our love love of Star Wars. Whether it's the cool designs, the nods to media outside of Star Wars with clone troopers' names and unit colors and designs, to the characterization that they get with little brief moments that they share between each other that kind of are filtered in arc to arc between season and season of the show. You grow with the clone troopers as a kid, and it's made them a very important part to the Star Wars identity of a lot of us who grew up with the show. Now that I'm done reminiscing over my experience with the Clone Wars as a kid, as I could talk about that forever, and that's a whole separate video for another day, there is something to be said about that demand for clone troopers. And the points that I want to make from here on out all come from an interview that I had the privilege to have with Daryl DePriest. Daryl DePriest used to be the vice president of global market management for Hasbro, and he was with Hasbro and specifically with Star Wars for the Revenge of the Sith line of toys and for the Clone Wars line of toys. He is an extremely knowledgeable guy. He's written multiple books on things like G.I. Joe, the Vintage Collection, and I would highly recommend checking out the interview if you want to see all of these details that I'm about to point out in depth. When looking at the disparity between how many clone troopers we have in the Black Series versus Cantina aliens, it really comes down to character relevancy. For Hasbro, both at a budgetary standpoint and at a marketing standpoint, clones tend to be the smarter choice if you want to sell more figures. Unlike with Cantina aliens, clone troopers in a lot of cases can be army buildable. There are a lot of people who will buy multiple clone troopers if it's an army builder, a grunt, or even if it's a named character. If it has a new piece that someone knows they want to repaint into a different clone trooper and make a custom, they're going to buy multiple clone troopers in the blink of an eye to do so. Clone troopers are also, as Daryl DePriest puts it, an A-tier character, whereas Cantina aliens tend to be a C-tier character. What this means is statistically how characters sell on the shelf. A clone trooper is going to sell better than a Cantina alien 10 times out of 10. Daryl DePriest in my interview stated that even back in 2007, when Star Wars and Hasbro were celebrating the 30th anniversary of the franchise and its theatrical release, they released a bunch of Cantina aliens, and they had to really pretty them up with Cantina parts and coins and other collectible items in order to drive those sales up. The characters and the demand for them were just not as popular anymore, and that's due to the people who want them the most already have representations of those characters in their 3 3/4 action figure lines. Now that being said, I absolutely think every single Star Wars character should be made in the Black Series line. Just because I prefer clone troopers and I think it's the smarter decision for Hasbro to lean further into clone troopers does not at all mean that I don't think Cantina aliens should be made. I think every character deserves definitive representation in the Black Series from Star Wars. Another point from my interview with Daryl DePriest I'm going to harken back to for a second here is the point that Daryl made about the 20-year rule, which is a theory that he had, which in recent years has seemed to have rung true. Daryl stated that the 20-year rule has a lot to do with the things you grew up with and the things you're nostalgic for. And it's definitely true for collectors who are in their 20s, whether it be their early 20s or their late 20s, even approaching 30. We are nostalgic for the things that we grew up with. It's true for every single person. It does not apply to just collecting or Star Wars. Everybody is nostalgic for things they grew up with. And for collectors in our 20s right now, it's the prequel trilogy and the Clone Wars. However, again, like I said before, there is a little bit of a microscopic generational gap for people who just missed the boat on the prequel trilogy of movies versus the Clone Wars. And it's for that reason that I think there's a way that both parties can get what they want out of the Black Series. There is a way to bring more clone troopers consistently into the line while also increasing the number of Cantina aliens that we get in the Black Series, because I will be quite frank, just having one per year like we did with Moma Nadon here in 2024 isn't going to be enough to satisfy collectors who want to flesh out a Cantina display. The reason that I'm saying clone troopers are the key to bringing more Cantina aliens into the line is that clone troopers sell. That's consistent with the Black Series. Even ones that are not very popular or within the collecting community are even disliked. A recent example I can make of that is the Obi-Wan Kenobi and 2/12th Clone Trooper 2-pack. I, along with many other collectors, found this to be a very disappointing release of this particular clone trooper because a lot of the paint hits that they missed on the original release back in 2020, they missed again with this release. However, the pack still sold out the day that it got put up for pre-order. Even named clone troopers that you wouldn't be able to army build, like Clone Commander Bakara, sold out the first day they went up for pre-order on Hasbro Pulse. Clone Trooper action figures have very minimal new pieces to them. Maybe an overlay or a new armor piece here and there, but for the most part, it's the exact same figure mold that Hasbro already has in use, and they're able to just use the money to give different paint apps to these clone troopers. This is an extremely cost-effective way to pump out new characters into the line, whether it be retailer exclusives or mainline figures. Because while the base of the figure is exactly the same, it is technically a different character, and a lot of people, myself included, are going to eat up any clone trooper that Hasbro releases. With clone troopers being so low cost for Hasbro as opposed to some other new characters, along with the high demand for them in consistency with Daryl DePriest's 20-year rule theory, there's a lot of market that can be tapped into with future clone trooper releases. And with these profits that Hasbro is making, they can kind of balance things out by making more fan channel exclusive releases of newly sculpted, newly tooled Cantina aliens. I think this is the best way that Hasbro going forward could really satisfy both camps of collectors here. So, in summary, here's my little reality check for the Star Wars Black Series collecting community. For those who are in the Cantina alien camp, you guys want more Cantina aliens in the Black Series. You guys want to see more of that scene fleshed out. I also know that this applies to Jabba's denizens from Jabba's palace and on the sail barge from Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. There has to be an understanding within our collecting community here that Cantina aliens are considered right now, and have been considered for decades now, to be C-tier characters. These are characters that just are not going to be as profitable to Hasbro as clone troopers are, and stormtroopers are, and main characters are. You can hear it straight from the horse's mouth talking to Daryl DePriest, who was in the marketing side of Star Wars and of Hasbro. It just is the truth. These characters are not as desirable to little Timmy when he's walking down the Walmart aisle, and to collectors, that's the base that you want to sell a figure like a Cantina alien to. That's the base you want. So doing a more limited run of Cantina aliens with fan channel exclusives like Moma Nadan is the way to go going forward with those figures. However, I do want to also say that I think Hasbro should be putting them out a little bit more quickly than they have been. I think a great way to solve this problem for Hasbro would be doing some made-to-order multi-packs. Maybe once or twice a year, putting 4 to 8 characters all in one pack, saying here is a 2-week pre-order window. Hasbro's done this before with the Vintage Collection Sabine and Chopper 2-pack, as well as the Vintage Collection E-Wing Fighter from the Ahsoka series. Those have been largely successful for Hasbro. They don't have to worry about losing so much money on not selling units on their own website. They're able to just make the figures for as many people that ordered them and get them out to the customers. This is also a great way for collectors to potentially get these figures all at once. It'll give you that satisfaction. If you get minimum 4 of these aliens at once, you get to put them all on your display all at the same time and really feel like you're fleshing out that display. Hasbro has returned to multi-packs in the year of 2024, specifically with the Black Series, and they've been largely successful with them, so I hope that this is something that we see going forward with more obscure characters like the Cantina aliens. And for my cloner audience here, that is kind of the nickname that the people who want the clone troopers so much have been called within the community, the cloners. I consider myself a cloner all day long. What we need to realize is we can't oversaturate the market with clone troopers. There are tons of clone troopers that I want in the line as well. I want all the clone commanders. I want all the named clones. I want every single look of clone trooper that has ever been made ever in my Black Series display. However, I do realize that if you just keep pumping out nothing but clone troopers, you're going to oversaturate the market, and you're going to lose a big part of your collecting community, which doesn't just want clone troopers. And that's where I think the community really needs to come together, is realizing that we can all get what we want if we understand each other, where we're coming from, and we have a better understanding of how Hasbro's business model works. Again, I would highly recommend checking out my interview with Daryl DePriest. We talk about a lot of these topics I mentioned briefly in this video, in depth, way more. Great interview. He's a great guy. I definitely recommend checking out that video. And finally, I think that both parties here will receive some great things coming in 2025 with the Revenge of the Sith 20th anniversary. According to Daryl DePriest's 20-year rule theory, this will be a great year for people who are more in that Cantina alien camp, the people who grew up with Revenge of the Sith, bought the original Revenge of the Sith figures off the store shelves back in the 2000s. This is going to be a great year for you guys, a very nostalgic year. And for cloners, it's probably going to be a great year as well, because a big part of Revenge of the Sith is all of those unique clone trooper designs. Clone commanders, clone units, clone troopers, you name it, we're probably going to get it next year. So with that, guys, let me know what you thought of this video. Do you agree with the points that I was making here and the arguments that I was making? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to talk back and forth with you guys. I always love having conversations in the comments. If you're not yet subscribed, subscribe to Blitz Transmissions, because guess what? I've got awesome Star Wars content coming out all the time. Make sure to check out my social media. All my links are in the description below, as well as my channel membership. For just 99 cents a month, you'll get access to all of my reviews on the channel early, as well as plenty of other awesome benefits. So check that out in the description below. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll catch you for the next one, and may the Force be with you.